something no of Stephen Lord. He's quite an opinionated, but also usually very poignant in his attestations. So we thank you for joining us today for a book launch. And this book launch, I won't delve into it much myself since we have the actual author, we have the writer with us today. So I'm just going to run through quickly the program we have planned for today, and then we're going to hand it over to the main stars of our event. Sorry, 1 second. Let me open the screen. Let's see here. This one. Share this one. Okay, is everyone able to see my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. So our program is rather straightforward. We're going to have a few opening remarks, I believe made by Mr. David Babulia, who's, as we all know, our co-director or Barbadian co-director of the Confucius Institute at the UWI-CH campus. Then we're going to have an introduction of Stephen Lord by Mr. Dr. Charleston Braffett, Senator Dr. Charleston Braffett, who, interestingly enough, is also fluent in Spanish. So perhaps today he shall give us a rendition of his introduction in both English and Spanish. And perhaps someone and perhaps someone in the audience will be able to translate what they say in Chinese. So we have 3 languages for this book launch.
Oh, wow.
After we have our introduction by Dr. Braffett, we shall go into a presentation and readings from the book by the author himself, Mr. Stephen Lord. And I'm sure you can also tell us a bit about yourself when we get to that point in our program, Stephen. Of course, we're all looking forward to it. Now, after we have a few readings from select experts in the book, we're going to go into our discussion. By then, we should have more people in the, we have quite a few people actually. So the discussion should be quite spirited, quite lovely. And as we all know here at the CA, our discussions span many different areas, many different aspects of discussion, so it should be quite interesting. It should be quite interesting. After that, we're going to have closing remarks, and I believe these remarks will be read on behalf of Dr. Lee by Ian, who's in the office with Dr. Braffett at the moment. So, without further ado, I will hand you over to Mr. Babulia. David, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tyrone. Good afternoon to all of you gathered here. I certainly hope that as we proceed, more persons will join us for this event, but we at CI usually press on, even if there are few. Persons have very busy schedules, and that is one reason we are recording this event, so it can be made available to those who are not able to join us in person. This is, in fact, the second time, if I remember correctly, that the Confucius Institute is fielding a book launch by persons that are directly connected to us, and certainly persons directly connected to China. The first one being by Dr. Charleston Braffett, which also touched on his experiences in China. And today we have the later comer, Mr. Stephen Lord. I don't want to say young or youthful because he's getting up there in age. And is now becoming more settled in life, and I don't want to say acquiring, but certainly he has now some more attributes of a settled adult person. He can probably go into those if he so desires. I first met Stefan, if I remember correctly, at the Embassy of China, where he worked for a period of time, and I must say that I was not terribly impressed with him at this point in time. There was nothing negative about it, but it was just okay. Just I'm being very frank. As an elderly person, as I call myself now, I deserve the right to be, in my last few years, to be very frank. And he was not impressive. It was okay. He did his work. He was okay. I would say where he started to become impressed with him was when he became one of the government of China scholarship winners and made his way off to China. And then I heard nothing about him until I forget what year it was. And I learned that he had managed in the midst of COVID, I'm letting all your secrets out, to find himself out of China when the lockdown came, and therefore not able to get back into China. And that you may say was, why did he do that? And that is really, this is really indicative of the person that is Stefan. He is an explorer. He is not shy to, when he is in one place, to try to explore other places. But my real connection came with him then, and the deepening of that connection, where I really became impressed with both his intellect, his drive to see the world, to understand the world, his love of China, his understanding of China. When he started to work with us as a teacher at the Confucius Institute, and as a man who hails in part from St. Philip, and I also from St. Philip, I had the responsibility and the pleasure really to bring him down to work a few days and to take him back home a few afternoons. And he introduced me to a very delightful but thoroughly bad for me drink, which I still frequent from time to time at a place in Corvally. So I am happy that he was able to do that, but my tummy is having regrets every day. I try to get into a shirt, which I love, but I can't get into anymore. So I was very happy when Stefan said that, you know, and as I knew about the book probably before many of you, that he is working on his, in a sense, his memoirs of China. And, you know, he told me how he was progressing on it. I was very happy to hear that he had completed, he had published, and I can't remember if it was his idea. It might have been, I think it was actually mine, because once anyone tells me, or I know that you have some familiarity with China, and then you're going to write about it, that immediately causes my China, not Spidey, but my China senses to go up. I want to hear more about it. I want the people that I work with and for whom I'm responsible, both Chinese and Barbadians and other Caribbean people, to hear more about it. So from that conversation coming down in the car or going up one evening was born this idea of us doing a book launch. So I have great pleasure then in helping in a small way to organize this launch of Stefan's book. In a sense, it is out there already. It has been fairly well publicized. He has done his work. He has his publishing people and his promoters here in Barbados. But I was very happy to put the support of the Confucius Institute behind this book launch and to help bring us to where we are today. So with those few remarks, the only other thing I have to say, apologies for Grace, who would have loved to be here, but as I mentioned, she is, I mean, Stefan well knows, she is vacationing in parts of South America while I get to do all the work here every year. But you know, Grace is with us in spirit, and she has sent some words that will be read at the end as Tyrone. So without anything further from me, I will pass back over to Tyrone to let the remainder of the program proceed.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, too.
I'm sure Stefan was equally mortified and impressed by your frank, candid nature. The hallmark of a real St. Philip person.
It was the circumstances. He just did. He did what he had to do. He didn't have to.
Very good, very good. So with the opening remarks completed, we shall now hand it over to Dr. Charleston Bradford. Mr. Bradford, Dr. Bradford, take it away.
Hello. Ciao, how buenas tardes a todos.
Bienvenido.
Mr. David Bubulia, co-director of the Confucius Institute. Stephen Lord, nice to communicate with you again, although electronically, but I'm sure we're going to have a lot of opportunities to touch base physically. Tyrone Yearwood, other participants in this chat, persons from around the world, good afternoon. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. Sha Wu Hao. I am indeed honored to have been asked by Stephen Lord to say a few words about his new book, Bajan in Beijing. I first met Stefan way back 2015 when I was Barbados' second resident ambassador to China in Beijing. And he was one of the early students from Barbados who came to the People's Republic of China on the Chinese government scholarship. And as customary, I invited Barbadian students to the Barbados Embassy at the beginning of their stay in China to get to know them and to let them know that the embassy was their home away from home. As far as I'm aware, Stefan's book is the second book on China written by a Barbadian. The first book, called Memories of China, was written by a Barbadian of advanced age who served as Barbados ambassador to China between 2014 and 2017. That book brought to the Barbadian public, I would say to the Caribbean public, a mature view of China and the diplomatic and geopolitical dimensions of the Barbados-China and Barbados-Caribbean relationship. It spoke to China's role in the world and the emergence of China as a global power. In fact, in the book I said, the world will have to become accustomed to the prominence of China, not only in economic matters, but in political affairs and in culture. The psychological transformation will not be easy. The difficulties arise from the fact that for the last 400 to 500 years, the world in all aspects has been dominated by Western powers and Western thinking. The task of comprehension and the adjustment is complicated by the fact that the change is happening rapidly by historical standards. China, like Rome, was not built in a day, but its dominance in world affairs may only be 10 or 20 years away. Some of that comment was supported by Richard Bernal, the late Richard Bernal, who wrote a book called The Dragon in the Caribbean, which gave a very prophetic outline of what he saw as the China-Caribbean relation. Stefan's book is different. It's a vision of youth in China. The book presents a vision of China that is fresh and exciting. He begins his book with a truth that I found when I returned from China. There's a common question that all Barbadians ask. That question is, so how is China? Stefan says in his introduction that he was tired of responding to this question continuously, and to satisfy the curiosity of friends and family that is inherent in the question, he wrote his book called Beijing in China, in Beijing. This is a noble reason to write a book on China, because nowhere in our educational system in Barbados are we taught about China and the history of China. Moreover, Barbados never had Chinese migrants as part of our population, as did Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, the little information we receive on China in the past and even today is normally filtered through the lens of Western media with Western bias and Western interpretations. So let me begin by congratulating Stefan on taking the reader on a fantastic journey that paints a picture of the passions, the struggles, the adventures, and the mistakes of a student in China. The book begins with a series of chapters, which very much like a diary, in which Stefan details all the activities of life in the big city of some 20 million inhabitants. But before we get to the big city, he details his travels from Barbados to China via Canada and the need to find things to do on such a long flight. And I have memories of that 12 hours from the west to the east. He records that he read John Bunyan's book, Pilgrim's Progress, which highlights the ebbs and flows of Christian life. He engaged in polite conversation with other travelers. And he said he was so excited about going to China that he felt all the vibrations of the airplane engines. He recalls that his real excitement started the moment he landed in Beijing and encountered some 700 people in the immigration line, and he wondered when he would get out of the airport. But he was able to begin to dismiss some of the myths of China, about China, when he saw the efficient organization of the immigration process. He engaged in many hours of discussion with fellow students and started to understand the organization, the culture, and the customs of China. He got lost in Beijing and arrived home one night after midnight in a city that he did not know. The registration in the university presented some interesting challenges in that there were students from everywhere in the world, and he thought he was in the United Nations. He joined a group called the Association for International Understanding that promoted cross-cultural experiences and found new and exciting things to do. His experience shopping in China is interesting, and he tells the story of how he was able to buy an entire suit, shirt, tie, jacket, and everything for 165 Barbados dollars, and the suit was made in 15 minutes. His views on the Chinese language are interesting in that he found that he could express so much more with just a few words in Chinese when compared to English. Chapter 7 of his book presents a vision of Stefan's deep religious nature and his deep philosophy of life. He notes, and I quote, "No life can escape being blown about by the winds of change and chance. And though you never know all the steps, you must learn to join the dance. You must learn to join the dance." A quote from Jethro from the Prince of Egypt. Stefan did join the dance. I found his writing style and description of events very interesting. For example, his participation in the 53rd anniversary of Kenya's independence celebrations in Beijing is a fascinating explanation of an event. And I quote, Stefan wrote, "I had prayed for her before we met up because she was having some problems which had her and her family really stressed. And I just wanted her mind to be at peace for her sake because she had exams coming up too. And I'm writing this paragraph while sitting in my chair the morning after the event and smiling to myself at the amount of fun that we had. We left campus by taxi because the subway was overpopulated at that time of night. For those of you readers who have any idea of how the subway gets in the most populated country in the world, you can appreciate why we would hail a taxi. Luckily, as soon as Susan's other friend arrived, a taxi was waiting for us. So we got in and left. Fortunately for us, the celebration was at the same location as Barbados' independence celebration, namely the Kempinski Hotel. So we had no trouble explaining to the driver where exactly we wanted to go. When we arrived, we could hear the music from downstairs and just followed our ears till we found the others. Kenyans everywhere. It had been so long since I've seen so many black people in one location. It felt so refreshing and nice. I felt at home. For the first time since landing in China, Chinese were in the minority, coming in at about a dozen. The other couple hundred were people of my persuasion, black. They were all dressed in formal suits and elegant dresses, and they were standing and talking. One of the things which struck me about the room was that there was only cocktail tables, no place to sit. When we arrived, we barely had time to put down our bags when a friend of Susan greeted us in the line for food. and inviting us to go in front of him. Kenyan food is delicious. Their style of beef and rice was exquisite, and their fish was so soft and melted in my mouth with exotic flavor. The double chocolate mousse was palatable and sweet, deserving of the name. The mid-level, elegant music in the background was soft enough to accommodate conversation, yet loud enough to grip your entire body and sway you like a boat on the pier. After the majority of the people had eaten, I got the reason for why there were no dining tables. The DJ hit the play button and the party began. The people started to dance in their places, and I looked on. However, the music, though unfamiliar, the beat and rhythm grabbed hold of my body, and I found my legs and knees unable to keep still. I knew that it wasn't the red wine, but the music. My foot started tapping. As I looked on, the MC said, "Join the line." And I saw in the middle of the room there was a conga line of about 5 people dancing and moving through the crowd. I reached for my phone, and by the time I got the camera running, there were 20 people in the line, then 30. The line grew and snaked around the crowd. When it passed by me, I saw a familiar face of a guy from church. Yes, I believe it was. I always see people I know. And he pointed in front of him and joined the line with glee. As I tried my best to dance along with my brothers and sisters, the feeling of people watching you disappeared, and the sense of belonging, the sense of family took its place. I no longer felt like I was way on the outside looking in. I felt welcome. I was with family. I didn't know what I did not know that I could dance for so long. There seemed to be no end to it. We shook our bodies and moved our feet for hours, with many little circles forming and doing their thing, with a person going in the middle to dance, cheered on by those surrounding. I'm sure that if you told me that I would be dancing with Africans, I would tell you, go home. However, there I was, doing the knee bender and the shoulder shaker, dancing with Africans. There's no right and there's no wrong move. You simply leave your pride and inhibitions at the door and loosen your limbs. There's music and wine to help with the loosening. Men in suits, women in dresses. Suddenly, all that came to naught, and these elegantly diplomatic officials transformed into the Africans we see on TV, with dancing and the hollering and the smiling and the laughing. One of the dancers even came up to me afterward and commented on how good I was dancing. Apparently, all you need to dance is a grateful heart and a smiling face. Enjoy yourself, all will be well. And there were 1 or 2 people, though, who weren't Kenyan, who, though they were having fun, no amount of music or wine could make up for their lack of rhythm. But as stiff as they were, the only weird people in the room were those who weren't dancing. Many officials and army personnel were there, and I introduced myself to them and offered my hearty congratulations to Kenya for the 53rd anniversary of independence on behalf of Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean. One top general, I don't know his official rank, asked me if I ever been to Africa, and I told him that my family hasn't touched African soil in 400 years. And he smiled and said to me that I have to visit Africa. I agreed and continued floating about the room. By midnight, the majority of the people there had left. There was one Chinese guy that was having the world of fun, dancing his heart out. I think he is one of those who stayed a little later. Later, however, the majority of people left, and some of us took the opportunity to grab some of the leftover food in boxes, and Susan, her friend, and I headed back home to the university. End of quote. I found that description of an event very, very fascinating because as you read it, you could visualize the movement, you could visualize the rhythm, you could visualize the scene of here a Barbadian in a sea of Kenyan people enjoying themselves. And I thought that I thought I should bring that to the audience as an example of Stefan's writings. Well, we often think of China as a society where there's no church or where there are no churches. But Stefan went to church in China, and the blessings of sharing and humility are treated as important characteristics which facilitated his ability to speak Chinese. When he was complimented by native speaking Chinese for his command of their language, he noted that it was only by the grace of God that he could speak so well. Through going to church and Bible study, he met a lady who invited him to become a teacher in a kindergarten school for children. And he excelled in teaching English to young Chinese children. He used symbols to teach the language. For example, in teaching the letter C, he would use cake or candy or chocolate to make his point. He indicated that he loved teaching children and seeing their faces light up after receiving new knowledge. In his account of his visit to the Barbados Embassy in China with fellow students, this was interesting. Not only did he speak of meeting the ambassador and his wife, but he also spoke of his goals and his ambition. And he enjoyed the discussion and the refreshment and the camaraderie. He described the Barbados 50th anniversary celebrations in Beijing as a taste of the motherland and indicated how the food brought back memories of Barbados. I remember the event very well because we invited Chef Paul from Barbados to prepare the food for the celebration in 2016. He enjoyed Chinese food and described in some detail his consumption of rabbit heads prepared with Sichuan sauce in Beijing. But Stefan did not only visit Beijing. He wrote of his visit to Hangzhou to see the beautiful West Lake and to Shanghai, the financial capital of China. In his book, he gives an insight of how tea was prepared for the emperors of the past, where young girls would pick the tea leaves with their lips to make tea for the emperor. His first Christmas in Beijing was spent in hospital. And I can relate to that because in Beijing, I spent a week in hospital also, although it wasn't Christmas. But his book reflects deep Christian principles. And in one section, he was able to point out one of these very clearly. On page 105, when he was asked by a Chinese who he would save if both his wife and mother fell into the river and he could only save one, he said he would save his wife. And when he was asked by the Chinese why, he said the following: the man is the representative of Christ in the marriage. Christ gave up himself to save the church. Therefore, I would save my wife. End of quote. When some Chinese disagreed with his opinion, he pointed out that in life, we're faced with situations where we have to make a decision between what we feel and what we know is right. And I found that fascinating because that happens to all of us. We're in many times in life, we're faced with situations where we have to make a decision between what we feel and how we feel and what we know to be right. This is true for all of us. We face these situations frequently in life, but Stefan had a clear Christian answer. And to me, this is an example of his deep thought and his association with deep Christian principles. These principles and belief in God permeate the book and explains his approach to life, which comes from reading the following chapters, which are filled with humility, friendliness, and forgiveness. His story of his relationship with Max, one of his roommates, is a story of patience and understanding. Chapter 10 of his book is called A World of Culture, and that chapter is a gem. It speaks to the Bible and its relevance to managing relationships, teaching Chinese to speak in English, and being engaged in Bible study in China. Chapter 11 is entitled Never Give Up, and details the strategies of endurance in a foreign culture. He quotes an anonymous author who said, when you feel like giving up, quote, when you feel like giving up, remember why you started. It is a chapter about dedication, about persistence, and about commitment. This chapter is a must read for all students going to China, as many times the challenges of study in a foreign country that is so different can be overwhelming. Stefan presents valuable tips from his experience. The final chapter of his book is called Crossing the Bridge of Hope. It speaks of missionary work in India and Nepal and his efforts to help children in need. The children were treated for medical ailments and given daily meals and love. His sponsoring of a child, Kunal Hembron, is an example of caring and a commitment to making the world a better place. The book is filled with wisdom, and every chapter has a relevant biblical quotation. This book is a must read for all youth, but especially for young people venturing to study and live in China, and for venturing to live in this multicultural world of the 21st century. I do not wish to say much more. I just wish to thank Stefan for sharing his experiences with us and encourage you to get a copy of this book and read it. It is worth a read. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction of Stefan and his book, Autographic. It was truly quite interesting to hear. I realize we have also Dr. Dalal Royal. He joined us in our Zoom meeting. So welcome, Dr. Royal. We're very thankful to have you here. Stefan, you have quite some influential people here attending your book launch. So that's good. It means
I
that your
was
book
saying,
really has been very, very, very well received. Very good.
thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Now, without further ado, it's time that I hand you over to the author himself, Mr. Stephen Lord, who will introduce himself and also share his personal thoughts on his agency behind this book and the reason he wrote it, and perhaps what your favorite part of your book is and what it means to you. So without further ado, I now hand this over to Mr. Stephen Lord himself. Welcome, Stephen.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Tyrone, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. And thank you, David, as well, for the opening remarks. And a million thanks to Dr. Brathwaite for the introduction of the book, which arguably sounds better than the book itself, right? I do humbly request a copy of that, if that is not a problem, to be sent to me. That is great. Just a brief introduction of myself. It was quite overwhelming to hear the very kind, frank words of both Dr. Babulia and Dr. Brathwaite. I do remember the first time meeting them both. I remember walking up to Dr. Brathwaite at the embassy in 2015, the embassy of China, that is, and saying to him, "Good afternoon, sir. I just want to let you know I want your job." At that time, he was the ambassador to China. And I thought that would have been the peak of my existence. Who would have thought that it would be in this wise? Who would have thought it would have been in this wise? David, you are right. The book launch was your idea. I never would have thought that it would have got this far. And my task for today is to introduce myself and the book, how it got here, and perhaps a snippet of my favorite section. From the time the book launch was suggested or proposed to me, I was told I had to, at least read a bit about my favorite section. And even up until 5 minutes ago, I was struggling. Which section is my favorite section? Do I read about when I first met Dr. Brathwaite in China? Do I read the final chapter, which is probably my favorite chapter? And I think what I would read is the explanation of when I spent my first Christmas. Dr. Brathwaite left it very, I believe, deliberately vague when he said, I spent my first Christmas in hospital. No, I was not hit by a car, which is likely if any of you ever tried to cross the street in Beijing, right? And so I would read about that. I would read that that section. That section. I would read that section when we get to it. I was indeed humbled by Dr. Brathwaite's remarks, and they are some that I really did enjoy hearing that. Especially when he talked about how especially when he described the Kenyan anniversary extravaganza, because that's probably what it was. And as he read, I was teleported back to that particular event, to the point where I can still remember what I was wearing, and the music and dancing. We drove home in the taxi that night, and the thumping of the bass was still in my head. You know, after you come home from a cruise or something, it was great. And of course, we had leftover food to last us until lunch the next day. Life as a university student, everyone, right? It is indeed surprising to learn that my book is the second book written by a Barbadian about China. I did not know that. I thought literature on such a vast subject would have been low-hanging fruit, so to speak. That everyone, if you want to write a book, let's write a book about something that nobody else knows about, so that they can't say that you're wrong. Well, now that we have Google, that's easy. It's easy to refute that. But I did not know that, and I am more humbled to learn that. I did express that the school that I attended there, is like the United Nations. When I first got there, first of all, the Chinese do have a nickname for it as the mini United Nations, and it is proven from the time you step into the campus and see people of every nation, tribe, and tongue, as it were. What makes it even more reminiscent of the idea of the United Nations is that whenever there's some kind of special occasion or some kind of special day going on at the school, the administration demands that the flag of every nation represented at the school be flown along the road once you enter the school. So you enter the school and you just see a parade of flags around the school, from the west gate to the south gate. So they just all go, and then they turn, and then it goes that direction, and they just put up there for the entire day. And we students loved it because depending on the season, once I saw the Jamaican flag, and I have many Jamaican friends. It was winter, and I caught some snow in the flag, and I took a photo of it and said, "This is probably the only time you will see snow on a Jamaican flag." And to which she agreed. And you see, I was not only privileged to learn Mandarin Chinese at school, but being a lover of people, I was able to greet a lot of my students from across the world in their respective languages. That's something that I really, really wanted to do. I would position myself in such a way that when they enter the classroom, I would be able to go, Здравствуйте to all the Russians coming in, and there were many Russians in my school. I would greet them in whatever language they were kind enough to teach me, and it helped to create a more welcoming environment, at least for my fellow classmates. In describing, I scribbled some notes here, and I'm sure that Brother David would be most appreciative of the double chocolate mousse that the Kenyan party had to offer. I saw his face light up like Wudauko on Christmas, and I'm very, very sure. I'm very, very sure. Am I right?
You're quite right. You're quite right. You know me.
Yes. Yes, that was it. That was it. One last thing before I get into how the book was, how it came to be. It amazes and again humbles me how one quote from one person once could stick with somebody else for a lifetime or many lifetimes. There were a few times where Dr. Brathwaite would have said something that I wrote that would have stuck with him, and it was something that I forgot that I even wrote. And it is amazing the impact that I'm sitting in a chair in a room in a dorm building in China, and I write down something on my computer, and then how many ever years afterwards it is being directly quoted by one of the most influential Barbadians to walk the earth. And I'm eternally humbled that it would have had such an impact. Okay, so how did I get the idea for a book? As was said in the introduction, hearing How's China once can be tiring, but hearing How's China multiple times in the same week from many different people can get rather tedious, to the point where I was copy and pasting Facebook messages from one chat to another and from one app to another, because I got it on WhatsApp as well. And I didn't want to forget. So we had people the following year saying, tell me about the registration process. Is it as, a kind word to use, is it as tedious as that of K-Phil campus? And I would say, well, here's my experience. And I've told them of my experience. I would copy and paste either the paragraph that dealt with registration, or just email them the entire chapter that dealt with registration. How is the food? Okay. And as was said very accurately, information about China is filtered through Western bias. And so when I would have mentioned to one person, I just had some curry, and they're like, there's curry in China, right? And I thought, turn to the back of your package of curry and you may see made in China at the back. Come on, be real. But it was refreshing to be that untamed, uncut voice of what China actually is and what it looks like, what the food is like, what the weather is like, to people who have genuine questions about the experience. And I wrote it down, and I decided, okay, let's start keeping a journal, so that when they ask, because they will ask, I can just send them the journal and say, hey, read this, as opposed to typing out over and over, I had this or I went this place. As the months rolled on, the documents which I was sending started to pile up, and I thought, what would it look like to print all of it and bind the pages? The thought, what about turning this into a book, did not occur until much later. It's strange to me looking back, how I could think to myself, let's print these pages that you typed out and let's bind them together with a title at the front. How did that idea come to me? But let's turn this into a book did not come to me, when that's what making a book is, printing out pages that you've wrote and binding them with a cover at the front. I did all of that. And it still did not register to me, hey, you have written a book. There was a little kiosk at the school. I say was because things change in China like that. There was a kiosk at the school. He would sell coffee, he would sell some sandwiches, but he would also print and bind, for example, if you have your thesis or anything that you have there to print and bind. And I decided to print that. It was autumn going on to winter, and so literally hot off the presses was my book, and I was hugging it to my chest because it was still quite warm. I met one of my South African friends en route to my dorm, and she saw this large book hugged to my chest, and she asked, "Which course is that for?" Right, in sort of a way as to say, okay, let me avoid that course because I don't want a book so thick. I said, no, this is my book. I just wrote this. At the time, the idea you have written a book, you have printed and bound a book, never occurred to me. She said, you wrote a book. I said, well, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess you can say I wrote a book, yeah. One thing about Africans that is obvious at the first meeting, they are very, very excited people, and they're very warm, celebratory people. So she starts screaming for joy in the middle of the road. I'm getting more and more embarrassed as she does this, and then she screams at the building, "Raisa!" Right? And I'm like, wait, how is Raisa? All the windows are closed, but then a window from the second floor opens up, and another African girl pops her head through the window and goes, "What?" And she's like, "Stefan, what up?" And now the two of them are screaming at each other out of excitement. I am slowly wishing for the earth to open up and swallow me at this point, and they're getting more and more excited. So then the questions start coming. When is it going to be finished? When are you going to publish it? Who's printing it for you? What? And I am overwhelmed by all these questions. I come up with the best answer that I could. I was thinking of finishing it when I graduate, right? That's a good answer. And she says, no, that's not enough. I am leaving next year, so I will not be here for that. What you can do is finish this copy now, cut the book off here, right? Print and publish and give me this first one, and then you start from now till your graduation about book 2. How's that? Okay, well, I said, well, I guess, right? I didn't expect that people would want to read it. At least, yeah, I didn't expect that people would want to read it. I just had it for, if you ask, I'd send it to you, right? Joe, okay, right? I would, if you ask, I would send it to you. I didn't think that it would be on Amazon. I didn't think that there would be book launches. I definitely didn't think that we'd be having this event today. So that is my gratitude is turned up. My gratitude is turned up. The process of writing it was simple, not easy. Writing as I experience something noteworthy, I come home, write about it. It was easy. But the editing it, the formatting, the paragraphs and all that, uploading it to the publishing websites and all that, that was the stressful part. I think if I had a choice between going through all of that and writing a whole new book, I would probably choose the latter, because the process was indeed quite tedious and expensive, but it was quite tedious. However, now that I've gone through the process, like some other processes in life, once you've gone through it once, it is easier to go through it again if need be. So that's it. I believe we're going to have a discussion afterwards, so I'm just going to read a short section here about the Christmas, and then and then I'll hand back over to Brother Tyrone. Okay. All right. This section is entitled Whatever You Do. Whatever you do. Some people partake in feasts, some hold parties, some go to church for the only time in the year. Others take time off from work and remain at home with their families, or even fly across continents to be with them. What about me? What did Stefan do for Christmas, his first Christmas in Beijing? Well, I wouldn't say that I had a feast, nor did I see any of my family members. My first Christmas in China was spent in the hospital. I wasn't the one ailing, though. By then, my cold had gone and only a few coughs remained. No, I had been invited to go to the Peking 3 Children's Hospital in Beijing with a friend of mine from the fellowship. Of course, remembering the children from the orphanage, I immediately cleared whatever I had to do and met up with the group which was going. From the train station, we met up with another team which had gathered to wait on us at the train station where we got off. From there, we walked a few minutes to the hospital and split into two groups as the numbers were quite large. One of the leaders of the team was a large white male, so he brought along a Santa Claus outfit to wear. The head nurse was extremely happy to see us and showed us where we could sit and sing Christmas songs. Those children who were able to come outside were brought out, and upon seeing Santa, they hurried and sat on the ground with the nurses as we sang English and Chinese versions of some well-known carols. While we had their attention, some of us had little booklets with the Gospel of John in Chinese to discreetly hand out to some of the parents and nurses who were there. There were also some little pamphlets with the true meaning of Christmas, which we gave out as well. Maybe if we had gone in saying that we had come to share how you sinners need saving or will spend eternity in hell, we probably wouldn't have got through the front door. However, with the God-given creativity granted some of us, Christmas cards were made, more than 80 of them, toys and other gifts were brought, and instruments were played to bring joy and smiles to the little children who are sick and suffering in the hospital, those patients who were recovering from various surgeries, and even the parents who were worried over the health and well-being of their beloved children. There was a large area where we sat and played and sang with the children. But my heart was still not satisfied. I hadn't yet touched the hands of any of them, nor had the opportunity to speak to any of them vis-a-vis. I overheard a woman asking a nearby nurse if there were still more children in the wards who couldn't come out. Hearing what the nurse said, I grabbed a few pairs of tiny socks and started scouting the remaining wards. I went into the first ward and saw a mother who looked rather drained and a small child on a hospital bed. I went in and lowered myself to get close to him. After greeting him, I reached from behind my back and produced a Christmas card. When the boy saw it, he dropped the one he already had and grabbed the one in my hand with great enthusiasm. "This one has stars," he said. He was so very thrilled that I gave him a new card, and the mother could just stand there looking on, smiling. In the midst of his excitement, I produced a pair of socks and handed it to him. He took them, and though his mouth was covered with a mask, I could see his eyes open with delight as he took the socks from me and started examining them. He showed them to his mother. He then looked at me, and in his tiny Chinese voice he said, "Thank you very much for these Christmas gifts." I smiled, took a picture with him, and left him rejoicing, tossing the socks up in the air like a man in a pile of money. Leaving his room, I ran back outside and grabbed some more cards and more socks. I was overwhelmed by the tremendously positive effect that a pair of socks could have on one person. I remember when I was in Barbados, I had a drawer that couldn't close because it was so full of socks and other clothes. An entire chest of drawers was in my room filled with clothes. At my father's place in the same country, I had another set of clothes. I was blessed with many things. Clothes is one of those things, and I am grateful to God. Yes, and that is how I ended up being in hospital on my first Christmas in China. Okay, Mr. Master of Ceremony, sir, over to you again.
Thank you very much for that warm excerpt, Stephen. I'm sure you brought the Christmas spirit to the middle of July, yes. You brought the Christmas spirit to the middle of summer. I myself felt really, it was a wonderful experience you had there. It was not what I was expecting when you said you spent your first Christmas in the hospital, but the subterfuge was very well received. I think we're all a little bit kinder after hearing your experience in the hospital. So, with that, now we come to the discussion section of our program. And it's at this point where I will open the floor to any questions. If anyone has any questions or comments they would like to make about Stephen's book, feel free to just hop on in. You can turn on your camera if that's possible for you. If not, you can just open your mic and ask any questions to Stephen or Dr. Bradford if you want him to comment on any section of the book you may have read. So now the floor is open for discussion, and I open it to everyone. Have a blast, take it away, and let's get into our discussion portion. Let's see who we have here.
If I may make mention of a point, Master Ceremonies.
Of course.
Stefan, did you mention at any point the name of your university? I might have missed it. I was away from the computer for Beijing Language and Culture University.
That's correct. Beijing Language and Culture University. Yes.
That for those of you who may not be aware is one of the foremost institutions in China for, in effect, teaching persons how to teach Chinese. Correct?
That's one of the specialties as well, but it's
there. And we were fortunate to have here at the Confucius Institute a senior teacher from there, Lisa. She was the spouse also of our co-director at that point in time. But we've had a good association with the Beijing Language and Culture University. And I think over the years, at least one of the students, I forget her name now, I recall, I think within the last 2 years or so has gone off to Beijing Language and Culture University. And that is certainly one of the universities where, excuse me for taking this job at this point in time, as some places may be restricting or reducing the number of scholarships given to places in the developing world as they're reducing the scholarships given to people from their own country. I think China is outstanding in terms of giving scholarships to people. You've mentioned that you have had a virtual United Nations there at the Beijing Language and Culture University. I think that is so probably with many universities that have international students in China, but certainly you would find it with the Beijing Language and Culture University. And I know that you did a lot to keep the Barbados flag flying. It was there at the Embassy of China, all the Embassy of Barbados in China, but I know that you did your part on the ground in keeping it flying at the Beijing Language and Culture University and helping to keep a good relationship that we continue to have and benefit from at the Confucius Institute. It is interesting that you focus on Christmas, and perhaps as a person of Christian, what's the right word? I don't want to say pretensions, Christian disposition, as I've been the beneficiary of some of your reasonings as we travel down to work and back from work, that you chose to focus on the Christmas element. I was also very surprised, and perhaps this was not a good example of Christmas in China, but on a few occasions, being in Beijing, perhaps Dr. Bradford can help me, and this is probably more international side of Christmas in Beijing. There's a hotel, Dr. Bradford, obliquely across from the Barbados embassy in Beijing. It is a German chain. I forget.
Kempinski.
Kempinski, right. They actually opened one in Dominica now.
Yes.
And I was very surprised in Kempinski, you know, how this flagrant display of the Christmas spirit, you know, that was there. We might
They're very Western and Christian in their
very
outlook.
Western, yes. But it seems also that Stefan and his group there, through not focusing on the proselytizing or the conversion element, was able to bring that Christmas spirit of love and giving and being there for people perhaps at a difficult time in their lives. And I think he deserves a lot of compliments from us for being part of such an undertaking. Thank
I
you. Those
think,
are my 2 comments.
if I may, David, and to the audience generally, I think Stefan's book has a very deep meaning for those of us who do not have an understanding of China and believe that there are no Christian principles and no religion in China. You talk to the average person and they say, oh, China is a communist country, they do not believe in God and all. There is a significant amount of religious activity and religious underpinning of Chinese culture, going back to the days of Confucius.
Yeah,
And the values that they
spiritual.
treasure are Christian principles. And a lot of us in the West do not understand that because we have been told that communism and atheism and non-belief in God are the same thing, and that's not true. And I think Stefan's book is a very good revelation of the emphasis that is given to Christian teaching within China and within Chinese culture, and brings to bear the reality that this is not an atheist society. I think that to a large extent, we tend to underestimate the role of religion and the role of religious principles in the culture of China. And I think this is something that is very important in reading Stefan's book.
Yeah. But if I may be provocative for a minute, I know there's a famous work, I may be misquoting the title, in China called Journey to the West or something of that nature. There's also a belief in some circles that one of our most beloved prophets journeyed to the East, but that it is not quite recorded in the books that have come down to us. It is believed in some circles that Jesus of Nazareth journeyed to the East. Is a blank period, if I remember, Stefan, in his life that that is not properly accounted for, and is a belief that many of the things that he taught were in fact aspects of Eastern spirituality. I just leave that there. I wouldn't say that I necessarily believe it, but I've heard that tale. I've heard that tale.
If I may add to what Dr. Brathwaite just mentioned, which also is something that I picked up on in Stefan's book and also my own personal experience. Because I too am a past student of the Beijing Language and Culture University. It is a wonderful school, quite small, but extremely, extremely diverse. Now, the question that everyone asks, is the religion in China? Do people believe in God? Do people, feel moral, and do they have a moral compass? One thing that we as Barbadians and even people who are aligned with the West, as people like to say, there is a difference between religion and religiosity. So whilst they may not be religion per se,
Spirituality.
spirituality, religiosity, whilst they may not be there may not be a large emphasis on religion. Prior to 10 years ago, now in modern day China, religion is accepted and is actually encouraged in this form of modern China. So if I just diverge a little bit, because we're delving into the realm of anthropology at the moment. Local grassroots religions are actually their status as religions are being re-emphasized there's a cultural renaissance that's occurring in modern day China, where things which would have been labeled superstition or what we may consider obia, or what may have been considered obia 20 years ago, are now being redefined as grassroots religions in China. Even the religions that were shunned upon 20, 30, 40 years ago, Christianity being one of those religions in China, nowadays is actually being reinvigorated. And my experience, if I just go back to 2017, 2018 in Xiamen, one of my best friends, his entire family, including him, are Christian. The people from that village are all Christian. Even when I visited a very small, out of the way village, practically in the middle of nowhere, they had one of the oldest churches, the oldest Protestant churches, in Eastern China. And when I visited, it was being remodeled, it was being, renovated. It was actually becoming a vibrant part of their local society. So not only is there religion in China, not only is there, a clear moral compass and a moral, there's no moral ambiguity really between right and wrong. There's also a clear rebirth of religion in China. And I believe Stephen may have been on the cusp of that rebirth. Because even being able to visit a hospital, as a foreign student, as a foreign person, it's no easy feat. It's actually quite difficult. And being able to hand up cards, it may seem like a very small off the way thing, but being able to even do these things is a big deal. It really is a big deal. So your experience is not only unique, it represents a change in modern China, where religion is being not only accepted, it's becoming part of living China, the living culture. And that I think it is quite interesting indeed. Because when I was in China, I only went to China, I believe, when did you go to China again, Stephen?
I went there in 2016.
2016. So I was there only about 7 years before you. And when I first arrived in China, it was a big no-no. You weren't allowed to talk or even handle anything related to any religious paraphernalia in schools or hospitals. It was a complete no-go. But in just 7 years, your experience was completely different to what I would have experienced when I first arrived in China. And that says a lot. That says a lot. Because as you mentioned yourself, things change in China very quickly. Very, very, very quickly, almost overnight, actually. And people tend to focus mainly on the physical aspect of that. You go down one street, the next day that street is completely different. But also on the moral side of it, things are changing quite quickly. And I believe that your book has captured a very pivotal moment in China's cultural development, which is really well done. Really well done.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I think I have some questions here in the chat. Right. Now, for those of us who are in the audience, has anyone had the opportunity to visit China before? Or are you curious about any aspect of China which you would like to ask, pick Stephen's brain to get his opinions and comments on? For example, Stephen, have you ever been to a church in China? What is the church like in China? The church experience, the congregation. What do you do? What's it like in China?
There have been, like you said, the local churches, which sounds almost oxymoronic to say local Chinese church, right? And yes, though they have been in that 7 year gap, tremendous strides in that kind of, don't want to use the word freedom, but in that kind of openness.
Opening, yeah.
Yeah. Though there have been tremendous strides, it is still quite limited. It is still quite limited. The the church that I used to attend most regularly was I would have mentioned the word fellowship in the excerpt that I read. It is the International Christian Fellowship, not Chinese Christian Fellowship. So you had to, by law, present your passport or anything like that on before you could enter. Especially for Chinese people. And so if a Chinese person, like how in the West we say, come to church with me, right? You don't do that to the locals, because if they don't have a foreign ID of any sort, if they don't have a foreign ID, then they cannot enter. And there have been some instances, not necessarily at the church that I was going to, but there were some instances where some government officials crept in unawares to the church, and they were not checked. And so of course, if you're not checked, then they can go back and say, okay, well, they were not checking the passports at the door, let's shut it down, right? And there were many instances of that as well. That's the international, be either Chinese or Christian church, as I would call it. That's one. There's another one, which is the Chinese state-sponsored church. And from the time you hear state-sponsored or state-regulated church, you think, okay, right? You get a little nervous. That church is huge. It's smack in the middle of Haidian. It has its own church building, which was shocking to us as well, with a cross the size of Manhattan on the top, and there are pastors and stuff in there. However, you would never hear a sermon preached on this topic, a sermon preached on that topic. This one is a little hazy, that one is a little ticklish. And so, of course, as its name suggests, it is state regulated. And then there are the ones on the other end of the spectrum now, who are those are the ones like the one you would have mentioned in the villages. Like, I don't want to say beyond the reach of the government, because that does not exist in China, at least. But they were churches that were planted by Korean missionaries. Fun fact, 60% of the missionaries from Asia come from South Korea. And so they would have gone to China, and the Korean congregation of the fellowship that I was attending invited me to go to one of these church plants. And I think I wrote about it in there as well. And it was a church building, but it was in Mandarin. It was the Chinese were there, and the people from the Miao people were there. So they weren't Han people. So of course the government pays a little bit less attention to them, right? Unfortunately or fortunately. But they had their church there, and it was what you would expect a simple church to be. There were old people, there were young people, there were babies running up and down. There was a sermon, there were songs, there were hymns, there were hymn books, there were Bibles. It brought to mind, if you go to that church and you see people who look differently, or as I say many times in the book, who are of a different persuasion. By persuasion I mean skin color. Whoever different skin color, different accent from you, it surely brings the phrase every nation, tribe, and tongue into reality. If you go to church in Barbados, you're shocked when you see a white person step through the door, right? If I watch church on TV, in like American church on TV, you can count the black people. You go, wait, oh look, a black person. Oh look, a black person, and that's how it goes. How did I do that? Okay, okay, and the fact that you can see the same thing that goes on in your church going on in another church on the opposite side of the globe is really quite encouraging. Yeah, especially to those of us who believe.
May I share a comment?
Of course, sir.
What I found a lot during my stay in China, based on discussion with other diplomats and living generally, is that while religion and church may not be as strong as in the West, the Confucian principles were very present in the livelihood and the way people related to each other. And I say that because, in a real sense, the Confucian principles, such as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, you may say it is a Christian principle, but it's also a Confucian principle. Confucius promoted that long before Christ. And so when you understand that these principles are fundamental to the Chinese culture and the Chinese philosophy, you realize that outside of classical religion, there is a moral compass that underpins the Chinese culture and underpins Chinese philosophy. And the fact that we are talking about Confucius and we have a Confucius Institute takes us right back to those principles which have dominated Chinese culture. And in fact, the new government of China since 2013 has been promoting more and more of the Confucian principles. I don't know if you remember, there was a time when Confucius was being sidelined by one of the elements of China during the time of Mao Zedong. But then, when this new regime under Xi Jinping rose to prominence, there was a resuscitation of Confucius and Confucian principles. And this presents, in my view, to the Chinese population a moral compass, something that is so important for the cohesion of the society, especially among the Han Chinese. There's another point I wanted to make, and I read something which I thought would generate an interesting discussion, and it has to do with Stefan's interpretation of if you had to save, if your wife and your mother were thrown into the river and you have to save one, which one would you save? And Stefan pointed out that he would save his wife. In many aspects of Chinese culture, the Chinese will tell you that it would be more appropriate to save your mother because of the strong parental respect or the respect for the parents that exists in that culture. I don't know if you know that at the time of the Spring Festival, so many thousand Chinese go back to their village to see their parents because of the strong parental connection and the strong parental respect that exists in China for parents, something that we are losing, God forbid, we're losing in the Western culture.
Yes. Yes.
Wait,
Yes. Sorry, Dr. Babulia, you can go ahead.
Okay, there's a question here from Pierre Wilcher to everyone, but before we go to the question, I want to just take an aside and ask Stefan, therefore, having answered that question in that particular way, that he would save his wife. I take it then he was not in the ZR van inspiring the gentleman there. Or you haven't heard about that in Colombia?
You mean the one where the
one who was
gentleman in
calling for his,
question,
he was calling for his mother.
he want his mother?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sure that I heard and saw the videos, I saw the songs, I saw the t-shirts, I saw everything related to that. Probably
So
before.
you don't support his cry. You would have been crying for your wife.
I would probably be crying for my wife, yes. The comment by Dr. Braffett, yes, there is that parental care that has been so ingrained in the culture that it has become part of law, where you are required by law, by Chinese law, to visit your parents at least once a year. Otherwise, you can face a fine or other harsher penalties. And I thought,
yeah,
okay,
see, there's
right?
a question here. There's a question here to the moderator, Tyrone. You might want to put the question by Mr. Wilcher.
Yeah. I am not precisely sure how many students are in China at the moment, but I believe it must be somewhere in the realm of 30 to 40 students, I believe. 30
That
to 40.
number fluctuates with each passing week.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. It is not a vast number, Pierre, but it's spread between the scholarship winners, which are not a large number, which is at one point it was like 9 or 10 going off to China, but it has dropped down now to about 4 or 5 this year. It's actually just 3 students. Then you have probably another 5 or so going from the software engineering. Plus you have students who would have been there before. So overall, probably as Tyrone has said, in that region, and as Stefan has said, fluctuating depending on people graduating and leaving and so on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Now, in response to Dr. Braffett's comment of this respect for your parents and your family, in Chinese it's actually known as Ren. I wrote the character in the chat. This is the Confucian principle of filial piety.
And
so
benevolence.
Exactly. So it's one of the main tenets of Confucianism that you must respect your parents, especially your father. It is a core of the Chinese mythos and the Chinese mentality. And as Stephen said, it may be punishable by law. So you must really respect and cherish your parents. So I too was asked that question. I think everyone in China at some point is asked that question. Who would you save, your mother or your wife? I was not able to answer that question. I was unable to answer that question because it feels that regardless of how you answer, they're both wrong. There's no right answer. So if I were faced with a situation where you had to save someone, I would say I would save who I'm physically able to save in the moment.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be politically correct.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay, take good care.
Take care, Joshua.
The respect for parents is as such, and not just the parents, but the elderly on a whole. That is assuming that your parents are elderly or if they're young like David. But my thesis for my degree was a comparison of the treatment of the elderly in Barbadian and Chinese cultures, because it came to me through one instance where we were talking about nursing homes, and it was myself and 2 other students. We were talking about nursing homes for the elderly, and there are some, and the phrase "I will put you in a home" has I have heard that phrase so many times that it seemed part and parcel of the Barbadian culture. Sometimes it may even seem as the best thing to do, given the circumstances, whatever circumstances they may be, to, if you can't take care of your parents, then you put them in the nursing home. Until I heard my Nepalese classmate relay a story of how a man in his village put his parents in a nursing home, and all the villagers surrounded his house with rocks, ready to stone this man for such a horrendous act of disrespect. And me at the time, I say at the time to be safe, I at the time already had which nursing home I was going to put my parents in mind, right? And he's showing, so there was such a vast difference between our attitudes towards nursing homes and the Eastern attitude towards nursing home that I decided to do my thesis on that. The teacher thought it was good, so the teacher thought it was good, so I guess that worked. Yeah, I guess that worked. That was in response to your comment, sir.
May I ask a question?
Sure, sir.
Is that thesis available? Has this been published? Is it something that we can read?
If you can read the Chinese, sure. It had to be written in Chinese, and so it is all in Chinese.
English,
but
is there an English summary?
Maybe I can whip up one at your request, of course. Yeah, of course, I can try that. Yeah.
It'd be interesting because we are currently discussing the policy on the elderly. And it would be interesting to see and understand what other countries do, how other countries manage their elderly. Because I think as we go forward, it's important that we not only look at our own society, but we look at other societies and how they treat the elderly.
Agreed.
Well, let me step out here and say that since I'm noted for flashes of brilliance, some of which do not always strike the ground, I would say that the Confucius Institute would be very interested in seeing an English translation of that thesis in its entirety. And we could discuss what would have to go into that. I don't want to go too far, but you know, I think in the context, as Dr. Braffett has said, that whole discussion taking place in Barbados, they'll be interested to have that as a document that could be shared with people and see what are the perspectives from China. You know, in Barbados, whenever China, you look on Facebook, anytime China is mentioned, you know, there's a lot of negative comments. My view, probably there are more negative comments than positive comments. And I think part of our job as people forming the interface between not just China and Barbados, but in fact China and a segment of the Caribbean here through the Confucius Institute, we would be very interested in those things. I think this is a good segue into me maybe prompting Dr. Delal Worrell, who is the president of the Association for Barbados-China Friendship, whose title is self-explanatory, to give his thoughts on the work from Stefan, and also about the work of the ABCF in these areas. Dr. Worrell, excuse me, Mr. Chair, for taking over part of your job here. So to recognize.
Yes, thanks, David. No, actually, I would like to support everything that has been said so far, because I think that his book is, in fact, something that really we need to, through the association, to give the widest currency to, because it is precisely these kinds of personal stories and personal experiences that are the best way to get the message across that we have to begin thinking of ourselves as sharing this planet, which is endangered, and learning about each other and sharing our experiences and aspirations, because the aspirations we have are in common, so that we can help each other and that we can better understand each other. And I think this is an important contribution to that. So I would I'd be very happy. I'm very happy to hear that Stefan is considering doing a summary of the book, and please send that to us when it is ready, and we will publish it on the website and circulate it not only to our members, but also to my wider network. And I also welcome your proposal through the Confucius Institute to translate his thesis, because that, again, I think, would be an important contributor to helping us better understand not just Chinese in this case, but since he also mentioned, the experience of Nepalese colleagues, extending the insight that is provided even beyond China. So I'm looking forward to getting some material that we can help you to publicize.
Very good, very good. If I may just add to what Mr. Babulia, what David just said just now, a part of the big issue, or part and parcel of the big issue, especially with Barbadian sentiment towards Chinese influence and foreign influence in the Caribbean and in the country, is that people tend to look at it mainly through an economic gaze. They seem to think that influence is reducible simply to a numbers game. How much money can you get? How much money is being taken by and for China? However, it's not that simple. For many factors, one being that China, in terms of scale, is an extremely large and diverse country with billions of people. Not only is it an economic powerhouse, but China is also an academic powerhouse. And what many people don't seem to realize is that many people in the Caribbean have already been part of this academic outreach. Stefan, myself included, many other past scholars who've studied in China. We have gained and we have shared. And in fact, interestingly enough, a lot of our academic contributions are actually inaccessible to the Barbadian public because of language or because of exposure. However, they're not inaccessible to the Chinese public because all of our papers, all of our our graduation papers, our theses, they're actually available on the Chinese academic portals. So our contributions seem to be a bit misplaced. And I believe that here at the CA, as David mentioned, we need to bridge this gap because we already have Barbadian students, we already have Caribbean students who have written papers and contributed on different critiques and different aspects of the Chinese society, whether it be culture, whether it be education, whether it be linguistics, economics, computer engineering. It's actually a very wide field that already exists. What we need to do now is to bridge this gap, to share what we have gained and what we have learned with the Barbadian public so they can have a more holistic and a nuanced view of what this growing Chinese influence really is. Because there is a lot of fear-mongering, if we're being candid, a lot of fear-mongering which exists within the Caribbean region. And I believe that this, the opinions that people have are not, they don't have the full details at their disposal. So even in their critiques are not actual critiques because they're not able to fully critique the situation at hand because of a lack of knowledge. And what we here at the CIA, what we're hoping to do, and hopefully when we work together with the ABC F as well, is that we can share the knowledge that already exists. Because China is no stranger. It's no stranger to many people who have worked and lived there. What we have to do now is to share our experiences, share our actual academic contributions with the Barbadian public to make them realize that it's not just a numbers game. It's much, much, much more than that. And if we actually are able to bolster our knowledge and understanding of China, it can only increase the efficiency of our relationship with China. It can only get better from here. So
if I may,
of course,
I would like to support what you say, Tyrone, because to a large extent, we tend to see the numbers. Everybody sees, oh, well, China has a lot of money. They're going to build this and they're going to build that, etc. And I was impressed with something that happened recently. Our Prime Minister, Myanmar Motley, met with the President of China in Beijing. And she said many things. But one of the things she said that was very, very important, she said, we admire the fact that you have been able to move 500 million people out of poverty over the last several years. Now, these are things that people don't capture when we talk about China. But the Prime Minister made the point that this was not only about going to China to talk about loans and financial support and this kind of thing, but here is an example to the world that you have been able to move a significant number of your people out of poverty. And these are important lessons. The question, the how, the mechanisms, the strategies, etc. We do not delve deep enough into these understandings of what has happened in China. We see China, we say, oh, yes, they have become capitalists, they generate a lot of money, they have become wealthy, they're now traveling around the world, they're building hotels. But what about the social dimension? What about the quality of life of the people that has improved over the last 30 years? And how have they been able to do that? We talk about Singapore, but China is an excellent example of the social dimension and the improvement of people's lives in a country that was considered communist, or maybe considered communist by those who wish to keep the label, but which today has improved the quality of life of its people. And if development means anything, development means improving the lives of the people of the country.
Very well said, Dr. Patrick. Very well said. I think your mic is off, Stephen.
Yes, you said very well said, and like I said, I added as usual. As usual.
Very good. So with we have this contribution to the literary sphere by Stephen. It's been very well received, and I believe it will serve a great purpose moving forward, especially with bridging the gap. Now, as David, if I take one of David's points at the CA, if we can share more of these actual lived experiences, and if we can also get an excerpt of your thesis on the Chinese old age or a nursing home system. If you can share these social aspects of China's growth and how it's done there, how it's compared to what is done here in Barbados, it can help to bridge the gap. It can help to
In fact, I wonder if I may mention the idea had crossed some minds, but we have so much going on that we don't have the time to take hold of everything. But the idea has come up of asking persons like your good self, Stefan, and others who have done to do it as part of our same culture club, as we are here this afternoon, to ask you to kindly do a presentation on your thesis. We wouldn't be able to do all, but certainly those that might have a deep, a relevance to things that we are discussing in Barbados. I think that this could be very useful, and we're going to look for, I usually like to have in following what my former boss, Peter Laurie, used to do. Once the idea is put or comes up, we need somebody to coordinate and run with it, to reach out there and see, who might be willing, what are the titles and the abstracts of their works. And from them, maybe we might not be able to do all, but at least might be able to publish all, have all of them available on the website, but have special sessions devoted to presentations on those works. I think that would be a very useful addition to the body of work that we have on China and our perceptions. And again, follows in the same vein of the Belt and Road activity taking place over at Mr. Arthur Lewis Institute of Social Economic Studies, that we are developing our own perceptions of China and not those that someone else gives to us. And I think this, from the very grassroots of our presence in China, would be a very, very useful thing to have.
But David, let me say that you shouldn't sell yourself short. I mean, the Confucius Institute has already conducted a number of events which we have been able to place on, get summaries of, place on the website. Remember, you had a long session with experiences of a variety of people. That's some excellent material. And we and a lot of the material that is already there, we really owe it to ourselves to do a better job of giving greater publicity to as we build on it. And I support your suggestion that we follow up on all the suggestions that have been made, particularly by
Lord.
Yes. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Okay, we have just about a few minutes remaining. So at this point, I will hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Ian Guo, who will be reading the closing remarks for Dr. Lee. Yes. Oh, one more question from before we go in. We have a question from Wendy, and she asks, where can we buy the books in Barbados, Stephen? Do we have to buy them online, or where
Yeah, unfortunately, it was much cheaper to just have it put on Amazon, so you can get it on Amazon and it's shipped to Barbados. Yeah.
Would you be able to share a link to the Amazon?
Oh, of course.
Of course. If you can share that in the chat, that would be wonderful.
Yes.
So everyone will have it available.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'll do that as we continue. Yeah.
Oh, of course, of course. So with that, I will now hand it over to Ian. Ian, are you in the office, or will you be joining from your own? There you are. So I'll hand it over to you, Ian, Mr. Gore, and you can read the closing remarks for Dr. Lee. Yes. So take it away, Ian.
Ian is there? Yes.
His mic is muted, however.
Put up your mic, Ian.
Ian, we can't hear you. We're not able to hear you.
There we go. What?
Oh, he may have to come by Dr. Bradford.
He's going to Dr. Bradford.
Yeah. Okay. His is not working. Or to adjust something.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Dear distinguished guests, and Senator Dr. Cheston Braithwaite, Co-Director David Bubulia, Rector Stephen Lord, and chairpersons, teachers, with all protocols being observed, greeting from Brazil. Firstly, please forgive me absent from the meeting due to travel and connecting problem. I'm unable to make myself present online. My apologies. The reason I agreed to make this remark is because the book's writer, Stephen Lord, was the Confucius Institute overseas volunteer teacher in 2021. He and Alex were sent by someone who knew that CI was short of teachers during that critical time. Their timely assistance helped CI overcome a difficult period. Thank you, Stephen. I believe that many Alistair students still remember the young local teacher who filled them with so much interesting knowledge about Chinese characters. I have been aware of this book since then when Stephen shared with me that he was reading a book about his experiences in China, particularly in Beijing. Hence the focus of the book. I had always dreamed of seeing the book published, but I knew it would take time. However, it has been released in 2021, though I thought it was published in 2022. The speed of publishing reflects the dedication of the writer and others involved. Once again, congratulations on the book launch. I hope that more Barbadian people, Caribbean people, and others worldwide will read the book, especially the younger generations. The book could expand their knowledge, broaden their horizons, and perhaps even inspire them to travel to or study in China to gain more experiences. I cannot wait to read the book and want to experience the excitement the still young now, college student Stephen Rhodes experienced in China. Please accept my sincere apologies again for not being able to deliver this message in person. I thank you. Li Rengyan, Co-Director of Confucius Institute of the UWI KPL campus.
Thank you very much, Ian, for reading the remarks from Dr. Lee. I believe she is still in Brazil at the moment and wasn't able to attend in person. But you did a wonderful job, Ian. Thank you very much. Now with that, we basically come to the end of our book launch today. And I must say, the discussion was very, very riveting. We had a lot of ideas that have been tabled, and I believe that going forward, we shall be looking to cooperate with you even more team here at the session here at the theater. David, do you have anything to add before we end the meeting?
Not a lot, just to very briefly and once again thank everyone for participating. There's somewhere, Stefan will be probably able to point me to exactly where it is, but there's some phrase in the Bible about where few are gathered. We didn't have a lot this evening. Where few are gathered, something, but it is not the number, but it's the relevance and the importance of the ideas that were exchanged. And I think certainly we scored very highly in that area. A lot of stimulating discussion, and in areas that I would not necessarily have anticipated, or maybe I should have, given the fact that I know Stefan is a very spiritual person. So and that is an area that has not been explored at all, as Dr. Braffett has pointed out, and is among the several areas of which we know little about China. That is among the littlest that we know. So I think that has been a very interesting and stimulating discussion. Thanks to Stefan. I can't thank the person who came up with the idea, because I'll be thanking myself, patting myself on the back, but I'm prepared to accept a milkshake from he knows where when he returns to Barbados as a thank you for that. So to wish you all the best, Stefan, in your continued endeavors, and hopefully we will see you again in Barbados in the, well, I don't say not necessarily not too distant future. It's all up to you, but we would always want to keep in touch with you and see you. And the idea, we will try to take forward this idea of getting more out of the several works that have been done by past students of Barbados in China, because now we are thinking about it. It is an important set of eyes and ears and analysis that we really have not fully tapped into. We don't have a vast number of students who have been there, but as Dr. World has mentioned, that we have tried to pick it up in getting people to present on their experience, their life experiences in China. Persons like Rommel Hall, I forget the name of the guy who was the architect, you all would know his name, and others, that lady who was with finance. I'm bad with names as I get older, but I remember the activity lady who was in finance and then went from China to the US. Good friend of Christopher Lee.
I think
Dion?
Dion, right, Dion. You all know the names of the people. So we have already, as Dr. World has pointed out, tapped into them, but it's a matter now of really picking it up and getting it there in a more systematic fashion. So once again, thank you, Stefan, for being with us this evening. Thanks to all the participants for their wonderful contributions. And we look forward with you to continuing the work. I believe also I heard, and I'm a vice president of the ABCF, that there is an invitation to you, Stefan, to be a member and to participate more actively in the, well, I shouldn't say more actively, but to participate in the work of the ABCF going forward. I think at the highest circles of the ABCF, you are seen definitely as an asset that we would want to have, part of the ongoing work of the Association for Barbados-China Friendship. So again, thanks to everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. Stefan, do you have any final words?
See, you got it there, where twos and threes are gathered. I am in the midst there.